I really appreciate
was going to be really cool. Way cooler. Okay, so yeah, the title is this talk, Break Your Promises with RxJS. I can't see you all anymore because I'm sharing my screen. Bear with me because Teams is not something I'm used to using yet. So
Doing fine so far.
So if anybody needs my attention, I don't know, someone shout out or throw a rock at your screen and I'll hear the crash, whatever it needs. So the title of this talk is Break Your Promises with RxJS. A little backstory behind this talk because I think it's funny. I gave a 4-hour workshop on this at CodeMash in January. And then I came to your meetup group for the first time last February-ish. Maybe it was late January, not 100% sure what it was, somewhere in there. And Joe, I think, requested lightning talks. So I thought, 4-hour workshop, I could put a lightning talk out of it together. And contacted him, said, yeah, I'll volunteer a lightning talk. And he said, that's great. Do you want to do it March, I think it was 18th or 19th? And I said, oh, I can't. That's when we're going to Orlando. So I never went to Orlando, but you all never had a meetup because something happened in March. Then Joe reached out a couple of days ago and asked if I was still willing to give the lightning talk. And I said, sure. And I went and tracked down my slides and there were 3 bullet points and then a 4th one that said demo. So if this talk goes completely sideways, it's all COVID's fault, really. That's what it boils down to. So who am I? My name is Eric Smith. Hi, everybody. If you see a Peyton Rules on the internet, it's probably me. That's the easiest way to find me. You pick a username when you're in college, you're stuck with it for the rest of your life. So Peyton Rules on Twitter, GitHub Peyton Rules. I stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/Peyton Rules. I've been a software dev for, I don't know, 20 plus years at this point. And I think it's important to mention that for this is I don't consider myself a singular developer for one. For instance, my current streaming channel is all writing Rust code. And I don't consider myself probably as good a JavaScript developer as many of you. And I don't consider myself an expert on RxJS or ReactiveX. I'm just an enthusiastic user. And I think I can help people learn it a little bit because I think the way it's taught is a little bit wrong. So all into that, I've told you the title. What is ReactiveX /RxJS/Rx? I tend to use all the phrases interchangeably. And so it's worth explaining at least a little bit. It's very easy to get with this technology lost in the terms, but especially if there's Angular devs in the room, you probably mostly know this, but ReactiveX is the umbrella term for a bunch of libraries and different programming languages for reactive, as it were, programming. RxJS is the JavaScript implementation. So one of the things that makes RxJS really cool is that you can learn most of it. If you learn it, you learn most of it in many other languages. So it's very popular in GUI development. So there's an Rx Kotlin, an Rx Java, an Rx Swift, probably an Rx Python, and Rx.net for sure. And the library is near identical for all of them. There's quirks because languages are different. But what that means is, I was first exposed to RxJS a couple of times, actually in the book in Reactive Programming with RxJS, and it didn't click for me. But then a few years later, I was on a project where we were doing it, where they were using it in Kotlin on an Android project. And once I got it, we needed to do some debugging on the iOS version. Well, the iOS version, same library, also using ReactiveX. So that made sense too. Then I was able to turn around and write parts of this talk, despite not having done it yet in RxJS, because the library is the same. So one of the main things that's cool about it is that you know one, you know them all. And I just realized I explained all that without explaining what RxJS is used for. I like to call it fancy promises. It's not accurate perfectly, but it's close enough for government work, because I think a big part of the problem with the way this is taught is that it's taught in a way that's very intimidating. So you can straighten out, and I mean literally straighten vertically, your asynchronous programming using RxJS to replace callbacks, promises, and even async await. Let me take you through this example real quick. And here, most of you can probably read this. Some of the library, this is from a book that's a few years old now, so this might be a little out of date. But the first thing it does, gets an element, retrieve data button. Sure, why not?
Hang on. We can still see your PowerPoint screen. So unless you quit out of PowerPoint, then you won't show
my
any other
PowerPoint.
screen.
Yeah, I'm not trying to show another screen. The slide you should see should be code on the screen, right?
Sorry, thought you were doing something. Keep going.
Nope. I'm gesturing like I'm doing something, but you probably can't. Well, I know you can't see that, but the light's not on there. So the camera light's not on. So we get the element by the ID, and the first one of these, get JSONs does pretty much what it says. Gets from resource 1, pretend that's a real URL, and plucks, meaning take the name field off of that JSON that resource will get. Meanwhile, source number 2 goes to resource number 2 and goes into a JSON data structure and says, give me for the props the name off of each one. Now, these two separate requests have not actually been fired yet. They've just been set up. You can then, in the get results function, merge them together, grab names off them, because both of these will have made a list of names. The flat map will go through every single one of the entries in the names from both of these requests, now interleave together. Select only the unique ones and take the number that you want. You can do all of this in any other number of asynchronous programming tools. But at least for me, I don't think you can do them in a way that's actually this elegant. Async await comes close, but I have regrets. Now, if you don't quite understand everything on this slide, no big deal. There won't be a quiz later. This is a fairly complicated example. But the reason I show it is because it shows just how you can do something that's pretty complicated without having to write all that much code. Come on. There we go. So I mentioned this already. Yeah, RxJS can replace a callback. Very straightforward. I don't know that people use callbacks all that often anymore, except in legacy code, but make your AJAX call to a URL where before you used a callback, you use the function subscribe. And that's one of the things that RxJS does, is it replaces something that would return a callback with returning an object, just like a promise does, which is why I say these often work as a very sort of fancy promise, right? Make the call, subscribe. And in fact, I think that's the next example. Yeah, Rx can replace a promise. Whereas the top example uses the fetch API and then logs the result. The bottom one uses from fetch, which is just a wrapper that RxJS provides to take the fetch call and return what it calls an observable, your fancy promise, and subscribe to it. Let's see, almost identical code. But a promise can't do some of the stuff we saw a couple slides ago, right? A promise doesn't do these bottom ones. So on the top here, we say we want to get the result and just check that if it's a 404, return an error. It should never be a 404. Okay, I can hear that. I don't know if you can hear my dog. She can be loud when she wants to. Only 9 pounds, but loud. On the bottom one, we use the from fetch and we use the pipe function to take and make a pipeline of code. Now, this might just be my biases. Some of my favorite languages are functional languages, and in those languages, you tend to align your code in the way that everything goes through a pipeline. So whereas in this one, we had to check if result status is 404. Here we can just map the response to a status, and we can filter out anything filter so that, not filter out, filter in anything where it equals 404 and log the status. These two comparisons are probably the same, not a huge buy, but when this pipeline gets long, as it often does, RxJS really shines. And finally, I didn't have a great example of this replacing async await, but I think this kind of does the trick. So in this more complicated example, we have a from fetch pipe things to a series of functions, right? So commented here, so the flat map does a response.json. The JSON function on a response actually returns a promise. RxJS is smart. Anytime you return a promise from one of its operators, it will convert it to an observable. And the flat map says, okay, I don't want to have an observable of an observable. So pop that off, flatten it, just like other iterators do, if you're familiar with that. If you're not, don't worry about it too much. Point being, JSON's asynchronous, but this pipeline will stop until it returns. Then we get a for loop where we emit each one off the body. Then we make a second call, because what we did here is chained our calls together, right? We made one from fetch. The first one made one AJAX call, or made one request anyway. The second one made it to a second URL that was dependent on the first URL. This is something we used all the time on the apps I've been working on the last couple of years. You make a web request, you get something from it, and then that leads you to make another web request. And RxJS is able to make this look like a very straightforward response. And eventually, and this is actually semi-realish code from a exercise I have coming up, or at the end of this, we return something that looks suspiciously like a tweet. But like, I'm duplicating stuff here. And so one of the other things that's really nice about Rx is it lets you get composition. So this is actually the same code. The compiled URL creates here return, which was created from this function call, which is a pipeline that takes the first URL, pipes it to the second URL via the map operator. Meanwhile, because compiled URL at the end is just an observable, our fancy promise, we can pipe again. And JSON entries here can also return a pipe, and you can click them together like PVC, right? Just keep chunking the parts together. Now, in one function, you wouldn't do this that often. But where this can be really helpful is if you have an endpoint, if you have a function that's one of the sort of lower layers of your, I don't know, architecture, maybe deep, then when that returns, you want to filter out stuff, right? So you have one function that returns this observable. You add a couple more filters and you return it back farther up the chain of the call stack. Each one of those individual chunks is independent of the other, but you can just keep adding to the pipeline to narrow things down to exactly what you actually want. This is going to be even more of a high wire act now because I'm not doing it the way I thought I was going to do. So slides are nice, but I am at the point where I would have run out of patience watching slides with code on them. So I have here a live coding example. Let's see if I can set this up right. No. Okay, do you still see my screen? And on the left should be code. On the right, we got browser.
Yep.
Awesome. So on the right-hand side is a list of reactive exercises to learn ReactiveX. So mentioned at the beginning, I don't generally, and I'm guessing since this is like JavaScript, most of you or at least have heard of ReactiveX. I don't like the way it is taught. By that I mean, well, heck, as long as I'm sharing my screen, right? Like, these thinking things. And if you were interested in ReactiveX, you come to this and you get the observer pattern done right. It's a combination of the best of ideas from the observer pattern, the iterator pattern, and functional programming. And you get this diagram that means nothing with the function called debounce that means nothing unless you know a little bit about like signal processing. It takes the simplest cases for ReactiveX can be understood as fancy promises, and you can build on top of those to learn the more complicated stuff. But there is a desire sort of among us, generally like humans, we always want to teach everything from first principles. It's almost like, well, if I teach you how all the internals work, you won't make the mistakes I did. But it doesn't really work that way. It's a little like trying to teach someone to drive a car by teaching them the inner workings of an internal combustion engine first. Like, really, you just have them drive slowly. So what I wanted to do was teach this a little differently, where we put some guardrails and showed some examples so you could use the basics. Because frankly, you can use fancy promises as your example for observables, for ReactiveX, for 80–90% of your use cases. And then when you get to the complicated stuff, you need to start understanding those marble diagrams. But those diagrams don't make sense until you've done a little bit of this. So I'm going to pick one of these exercises. Do the take 5 JSON rows 1. Unless my server's not running, then we won't do anything until I start my server.
So just a quick comment, Eric. It's really, really tiny text. It's
okay. I can make that bigger.
Yeah, if you could.
Yep, can do.
That makes it easier. Thank you.
No problem. Why did that come up? That wasn't what I wanted. Let's see. Probably not the one you're worried it was tiny, though. All right. Any better?
Way.
Okay, perfect. Take 5 rows. All right. So the way this app works is you've got a bunch of exercises on the left. And you call in the app and you fill out a series of puzzles. No phone. And you'll get answers on the right-hand side because it's a little React app. So the one I'm going to do here is to take 5 rows. And let's see, take the first 5 entries of the JSON response to the passed in URL. Fetch will emit one 3,000-line JSON object, so this is going to require combining operators. Each one of these starts by returning empty. And the way these functions work is they just return observable. It's one of the terms I've glossed over when explaining this stuff. You know, this is our fancy promise. And we'll start by using the from fetch for the URL. Now, I'm not going to save that because this automatically reloads, and this particular example has an issue where I mentioned it's a 5,000-line thing. It will happily hang the browser for me. So from fetch is going to take this passed in URL and prepare to make a request for the other side, which you don't change if you're doing this particular example, but for the other side of the app. And I'm going to take you through it for a minute since we've got some extra time today. Essentially, that will return the observable that the app itself uses to display the results, not that one, here where it says your JSON. If you like it. So there's a warning here. All right, so from fetch, okay, well, the first thing you have to do with a URL we fetched is convert it. So we want to say flat map, and that is where we take, the reason we're going to do flat map is because this response is going to return JSON. I hope it's not cheating. I know it's JavaScript meetup. This is actually TypeScript.
We'll cope. We'll cope.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, so JSON returns the promise, which RxJS's operators can all handle. If your anonymous function returns a promise, it will just be magically converted to an observable. Flat map works like flat map if you're familiar with it from functional programming. Map would take a response and would take whatever's passed in, convert it to whatever you want. Yeah. Take A, make it B. Flat map expects the function to return an observable, which this essentially does, and takes the observable off it so that you don't have an observable. So in functions, it's usually you don't want the array of arrays. It's flatten and map. There's a second flat map you have to do on this one. And that is because JSON happens to be an array. The JSON coming back happens to be an array. And let me type it in before I forget what's in my head. But you can operate it on as an array, but you'll have to write functions. What usually is the easiest way to handle this is to then take that array and spit it out one at a time. So we're going to convert this JSON array into one at a time entries. And finally, there's a simple operator called take. Now, I have a bad feeling I'm forgetting something. Take 5 rows would take 5. This claims I hit them all. And reload page. That's the one that, boom. So the first 5 entries are all little JSON blobs. Now, if I took you through some of this, you'd see that we can actually then take this and do further operations on it as we go. This is a little function, doesn't do a huge amount. I didn't want to go into something that's too in-depth for this, but I do want to take you through one little bit of this. Oh, look, the wonderful bracket. And what I want to show you, the reason I think this is interesting actually is each one of those little links is a React component. I would not call myself a React developer if I'm feeling particularly kind. In point of fact, I hadn't done React in many years when I made this thing. But what I show you is that the React component calls to the puzzles that we just did. So there's our take 5 rows with a passed-in URL, and all it does is subscribe. This little set rows function just, I think it had to do something to make rows work in a React component. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, the use state. And it compares it to the expected IDs. Now, normally I don't take people through this, but the reason I wanted to show it to you is you'll notice there's no Redux, Flux, acid reflux, any of the other storage mechanisms. What I found is frequently on small stuff, ReactiveX can take the place of many of your stores because all you're doing now is making components that observe a thing. So each one of those little links just makes a small little component, makes a call to any one of these puzzles. I'm not planning on taking you through any of this stuff today, but I wanted to show you how the ReactiveX made things work rather nicely to get this handy thing. And I know there was a part where I had to hit refresh. So lest you think I was cheating, that was because if I take 6, we should get an extra one and it fails.
Eric, can I ask a question?
Absolutely. I was literally going to say, are there any questions?
I think the thing that's always been challenging for me with RxJS is the first time you hit the place where you need to use flat map, it just stops you in your tracks. And I think the thing that would be helpful is if you could describe how you knew to do that. Right? So like you kind of knew you knew the answer already for this one. I'll put you on the spot, right?
Yeah.
So, but what I would typically do is take, like, okay, I'm gonna do the fetch, and then I want to see what that output looks like. Then I try to figure out, okay, what do I need to do next to get to my next step? Is there a way you can tee or dump out at each level what the result of each operation is?
You absolutely can. I don't want to do it with this one because, actually, wait, I can do it here. So if this is this one going to be too big? Yeah, the shorter answer is absolutely yes. And the other answer to your question, how I know to use flat map versus map. Well, obviously I practiced this one and I've done these answers a few times. And the logical answer is anytime the operation you're mapping is actually going to return an observable or a promise, it's going to be something else that's async. You actually want to flat map and not a map. The real answer is about half the time you use map, it doesn't work. And you're like, wait, maybe this should be a flat map. Let's do, oh, you know what? I'll do this. Status. So tap is the operator that lets you do exactly what you're describing. This is going to say, take the response, log what the status is, but continue on through the pipeline, returning response. Basically, the pipeline gets unchanged. So you could do this, for instance, with map, but you would have to then make sure you remembered to return response. Otherwise, you'd break it in the middle. So that's what tap is. It's actually meant to handle any kind of side effect that happens in the middle of your pipeline that doesn't actually affect the pipeline. I think sometimes it's called do on next as well. And now if I go to inspect element, I should probably have to do. Did I save? Where's my up here? Take 5 rows. I might have to hit refresh. Did I miss it? This is response analysis. Let's see if I can get them here. Where are my log entries? I did this yesterday. Oh, wait, do I not have?
Maybe you're filtering out that log.
Yeah, I wonder if I am somewhere. That's because that is definitely what I would usually do. You did put me on the spot, though. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong, but that is definitely how, like.
That's okay. I mean, yeah. No, I just was curious from, since you've thought about these quite a bit. Typically,
it'll definitely work if you stop looking.
Logging out what the value is as you add each step. If there wasn't.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, that's why I'm a little puzzled why I'm not seeing it right now, is because if you look at this particular exercise, it mentions, oh, if you need to stepwise debug, here's tap.
Oh, okay, great. Okay.
It's a coincidence you happen to pick that one for that question. But that is what that is supposed to be. But I strongly suspect I'm doing something silly. Always, it's usually the case. Do it again. Here's the response. What am I doing wrong? Yeah, I'm not sure why that's not showing up. I'm gonna have to figure it out. I don't want to keep everyone busy, especially because we have another talk.
Yeah, don't worry about it at all. You answered my question. Thanks a lot.
No problem.
So if I can slip in one more question before we
go for
wrap
it.
this up, or if anyone else has questions. Error handling. That's what I'm missing here. you're doing a fetch, you're passing data around, you're expecting to be a certain format. I notice you're using pipe, and then you've just got more or less an array of functions. But what do you do?
Yeah, I
if
know
any
what's
one
in
of
there,
those
right?
Fails?
And actually, like, so you've got an error method handler actually in the subscribe. So let's see if I can solve an answer off the top of my head. So I haven't said answer. Where's that one? Yeah, that's a very good question. And oh, I know why the console is not logging, because in some of these I stub out the console and make you handle it. That's why I actually broke console log. Let's see if I can get. Yeah, that would definitely do it. Okay, so this one takes an observable, yeah. And if so, this is actually sometimes different depending on. Oh, perfect. Got them in TypeScript, so it even tells me what to do. And this isn't going to actually have success, but it's should be. So yeah, I'm completely bypassing error handling. I need to return on this one? No, I don't need to return. Got that right. No error sent. I wonder if it's console.log or. But the short answer is yeah, you actually just take a second one. And in RxJS, it's always the second parameter to subscribe. And some of the other ones, you actually have an explicit on error, which I actually prefer. I can't remember if this was console. It might have been console here. Oh, that's definitely console.log.
So I guess I'm mostly curious on your previous example, the take 5 rows.
Yeah.
Like, what if something goes wrong in that?
Yeah, so if something went wrong in there, I'm in what I just did.
Do you end up like wrapping it and all that? Or?
So in this case, well, like I said, I'm ignoring it. What I'd probably have it do is over at the component. Let's do take 5 rows. Here I've got this subscribe row set rows. I'd probably want to handle my error here.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And I would say handle the error, log, throw an alert, do what you need to do. Because yeah, very good question. And like I mentioned, that some of the other libraries do that explicitly. That's actually a minor, I would say, peeve I have with the RxJS library, because it just puts it in subscribe, which I believe actually matches like the official ReactiveX implementation, but I find a little less explicit. Yeah, so, and you can, much the same, you can add error handling anytime as long as you haven't terminated with the subscribe. I got a little more left, so I don't know if there's other questions before I move on.
Yeah, Eric.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Looks cool. A little like what's like really catching, and I commented a few things here because there's that thing. There's a whole talk you can do about differences between promises and observables, right? And
oh, sure, yeah.
And I agree. Like it's like if you teach in the beginners class, it's like because most of the time, like you use it for HTTP call, right? To consume that stream.
Right.
That's what's in Angular. I'm an Angular guy. You use that to make a call and subscribe to the data. And overall, I wonder, like, what's your analogy? What do you think of observables? Because I think it's a little dangerous to tell them they're fancy promises, like that really catches. I'll tell you, like, what I think of them, and then I wonder what your thoughts are. And if, like, you talk on topic, I don't know if you know that Ben Lesh, right? He introduced all this thing, and I'm not sure what he was thinking of, but like a few years using that observables, it's like a stream that you're using. It's a pipe, you tap it into it, and then you have a way to map the stuff like you want. Versus promise is like, hey, there is that call, it's expensive, you're gonna wait for it, go execute your call, don't wait for me, and I'll come back when it's done. And it's one value, right, versus like of that stream that you're thinking. And that's why I was wondering why you decided to call them fancy promises, and like what's your analogy of observable? To me, it's like a stream, like water stream, right, of mountain or.
So the stream example is more correct. Because I do have one or two more slides, so I'll try to answer this, and then I'll finish up, and then we can see if there's more questions. Just because again, I don't want to hold up. I know we have another speaker, but hold on a sec. So I use the reason I use fancy promises as an analogy is that it's explicitly for beginners, because the stream is more accurate, but you also don't need it for a while. If you're just making a request and getting back data and doing some stuff with it, pretending it's essentially a promise is okay. It doesn't matter that much. You're not going to get into schedulers and streams, and because I find all that stuff to be really intimidating, and I actually think a lot of example code tends to be really intimidating. That shows people, look, because it's showing you all the really cool stuff you can do, right? So what I prefer to do for this is say, okay, this is like skiing the bunny hill, right? When we tell people how to ski a bunny hill when they're skiing, if you've ever learned to ski, right, someone has probably told you, especially here in the Midwest, right, you pizza and then you go spaghetti or, French fries or whatever to go fast and pizza to go slow, and you'll point your thing. Now, if you want to ski that's not the right way to ski, but it gets you down the bunny hill. And if you try to teach a brand new beginner frequently, like, oh, well, here's how you do like a parallel turn, there's a very good chance they're going to end up crashing into the tow rope. And it's very complicated, and they start thinking about too much, and so they can't get anywhere. And so you're right that the fancy promise analogy, it doesn't hold up. It breaks down, and you can get into a little bit of trouble. The reason I use it so far anyway is because you won't get, well, first off, you won't get into, like, I don't think you'll get into trouble on day one. I wouldn't use that as an analogy if I felt that way, but it's because I want to make sure I give someone new to this an anchor point that they're comfortable with and have seen before. Most people know what a promise looks like in JavaScript land anyway. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have used that because promises were fairly new, and it's like, well, I find promises confusing. So you're right that technically it's a stream, and you don't get to do some of the cool stuff that they'll show with like mouse clicks or, sockets or, there's anything that's streaming data if you just think of it like a promise all the time. But some of the stuff I showed you, like the marble diagrams, even if, at least I found when I tried to learn it the first time and had this inkling something was cool here, I found the way too intimidating to actually use any place worthwhile. I couldn't figure out a way to actually use the darn things, even as I'm going, I know there's something cool here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I agree with the diagram, though, like, yeah, it's tacky. It's like from the school, right? Versus like, think, this is what I would put there. Put that pipes that flow in, right, with the tabs where you're tapping to get the value. You can open the tab, you can close the tab, you can put another pipe, and then like with that image, you would explain it. Yeah, I agree with with this diagram they have on the landing page. Also had some difficult time when I started.
And you can go like years without needing to use debounce, and that's the first one they give you.
Yeah.
Just a few.
Yeah, when yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I can't see faces right now. So just that was my lightning talk. I think we're 40 minutes in.
Well done.
The just a couple learning resources. So this tool that I showed you here, it is on my GitHub. I'm probably going to start adding to it. It's a little overdue for some maintenance. I haven't looked at it in a little while. And I know I've got a Dependabot pull request sitting there that I should get to, and a friend of mine made a pull request. You've got the official docs, right? The ReactiveX.io, RxJS. I tend to use the ReactiveX docs when I'm looking up functions because this is not always true, but RxJS and all the different implementations have their own little helper functions. Some of those you really need to know, like pipe does not exist in Kotlin because it's not needed to do that kind of call with the pass-through, right? The way it is in JavaScript. But most of the time, it's things like, what's the one? I forget which one it is. There's one JavaScript RxJS users tend to use instead of flat map that, yeah, it slips my mind right now. And I don't like that only because flat map is ubiquitous. It's in all the ReactiveX implementations. And the one that I can't think of right now is only in JavaScript. And if I could choose one, if there's two functions that mean the same thing, and there is a lot of aliasing that goes on where they do that, I'm going to choose the one that's specific, or that's in ReactiveX, not specific to one of the implementations. That said, the same, beware the Marvel diagrams. I kind of stole my own thunder and showed you this. This diagram is trying to tell you that the debounce operator will only take intermittent samples of the latest value that was emitted from the stream. And even me explaining that out loud with the picture makes it hard. And there are ones that are much, much harder. They are not bad or inaccurate per se, but I think if you're a beginner, they're confusing as heck. And you start wondering, you get into that whole, why would anyone do this kind of thing? You're like, you could do most of this stuff with things like map, flat map, and take. And then eventually you'll find debounce and be like, oh, that's really cool. It's useful, but for a small number of situations typically. And I think, oh yeah, that's me again. Oh, you still can't see me. I guess I can stop sharing and then see. Yep. Wait. Oh, now I see new faces I hadn't seen already. Yeah, so I'm Eric. Peyton rules on everything. If you want to watch me flounder around with Rust code tomorrow morning, you're welcome to get up and check out my Twitch stream at 7 in the morning.
That's a nice advert. That's a nice advert.
Yeah. For some reason, I seem to be doing better with people in Eastern time and overseas than I am with people in the Pacific time. They're not getting up at 5 a.m. to watch someone code Rust. I don't know why.
Rust's just not taking hold.
I don't think that's the problem. Might be the time.
So awesome.
Thank you.
Thank
Well
you very
done.
much,
Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate it. Taking the time.
Pleasure.
I would say, and we don't have to, like, the recording portion of this will be cut off at this point, so we don't have to like really digress. But the whole discussion about whether it's dangerous or not to describe observables as fancy promises has been around a long time. So I had to double check. The observable proposal for ECMAScript has been in stage 1 for over 3 years now. I know Andre Stoltz did the RxJS Marbles website, which was like kind of the first thing that everyone landed on back in the day. And Ben Lesh is always out there, although he did just miss. I don't know if you guys saw that. He was supposed to speak to a group that, like, it was very organized on Monday, and he didn't show up.
Oh no!
So that guy. But I do think there is a problem in how people learn observables, and it's why it hasn't really taken hold, because you do find people who like are super comfortable with them, have like really learned it. You know, somehow it ended up clicking with them, and then they go out trying to preach it to the world. But I think the reason the proposal, I mean, the proposal has a bunch of issues and a lot of comments on that, but I think the reason that like this hasn't taken hold the way RxJS fans would really like it to take hold is exactly that problem. Like nobody knows the best way to teach it. The easiest way, like the entry level lesson, is still kind of elusive. You either have to like need to use it because you got thrown into an Angular project, right? So you have to learn it, or there's got to be some sort of like entry level, you know, process. You know what I mean, beginner level process. And I think it's been hard hard to find because you just get people on both sides of the fence. Those who don't know it at all, and it's a complete fucking mystery. And then those who are so deep into it, you know, they just start rattling off all these operators, and like they'll have discussions about it, like, oh no, you don't want to use that one, you want to use this one, and you find out there's fucking 9,000 of them. But I mean, observables are super powerful, and it was probably you, Eugene. Somebody mentioned like, you know, promises aren't cancelable, and like that's at the end of the day, like that's one of the things that's super attractive about it. Like, just start with that. Like, here's a promise, you can't cancel it. Here's an observable, you can. I don't know. I think that's been a big problem with RxJS, like really taking hold, or specifically observables. Like I think we should have observables directly in JavaScript.
That'd be cool. But yeah, I think you're right. It's hard for people to get a toehold. I mean, yeah, like there's, yeah, I mean, and some of the material that was out there when I was like working on some of this stuff last year, where like there'd be these really, really cool examples, but it was almost like monads, where like everybody who got into RxJS was like, now I'm going to show you every single feature of this cool thing, and I'm going to do it in one slide. And you will come away going, well, if I ever understood what any of that did, I'd be really smart. But I have no idea what you just put.
That's a t-shirt right there.
But there is definitely like that whole like, oh, I'm really excited about this. Like, is it the Netflix guys that are a group that they're really big and reactive, and everyone should be doing this. We love it.
The observable proposal is from, and I'm gonna murder his name, but Jafar Hussain. And I know when that came up, he was with Netflix. I don't know if he is anymore, but a lot of guys. I mean, I think he might be on the TC39 committee actually. Like he's been a big advocate of RxJS and came from the Netflix culture, but I think he was like a big driving force there as well.
And I think it gets just it's really exciting. Everyone should learn this. I will feed you from the fire hose.
I think that's very appropriate.
All right,
That's great.
that was almost an hour. Fantastic.